there's one thing that's been on the forefront of my mind since you mentioned it, and it was JFK and how he was turned on.
Yeah.
And I know this could be like a huge discussion, but I want to know what you've come across as far as his involvement with this. Where did it go? What was his experience like? Did he talk about it? Were there any, communications that he had with anybody about that specific experience for him? You said he was turned on to psilocybin by Mary Pinchot. What was it?
Meyer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me alert our audience to a book that I don't have in my library all burned, but the book is called Mary's Mosaic.
I can pull it up.
By Peter Janey, who has become my very close friend, and I think just one of the most courageous, and it's one of the most important books, I think, in the modern psychedelic movement. Now, Tim Leary, in his autobiography, Flashback, mentions this, that was published in 1983, too. And he says that while he's still at Harvard, one day he looks up and there's this beautiful woman at his door. And she says, "I've come to learn how to administer LSD." And Tim says, "Well, that's tricky business." And she says, "I've got friends who are very powerful people in Washington, and I want to turn them on." And he says, "Well, just send those powerful men here and we'll do it here." And she says, "Out of the question. These are very visible people. And if you want, we've heard you say that LSD could bring about world peace. And so if you want to do this, through me." So Tim is charmed and he hangs out with her, few meetings, gives her psilocybin. And then 6 or so, 8 months later, JFK is assassinated. And another several months after that, she's assassinated. And I was very fascinated. And then it comes out that she was JFK's lover. And so it was like a dangling thread in my looking at all of this stuff. And then whenever that book came out, Mary's Mosaic, I picked it up and I read it cover to cover, practically in one day. Got a wicked sunburn sitting out here on the cliffs. I just couldn't put it down. And it goes into the whole thing and who Mary Meyer was and who she was married to and who her connection was. She's right in the very inner circle of the whole Washington, D.C. press corps. I don't know exactly the details, but let's see, her sister was married to Ben Bradley, the Washington Post. Her former husband, Cord Meyer, was one of the main instigators of Operation Paperclip. She was right there in the heart of the movement. She knew JFK since they were in high school.
Yeah.
And then they became not just lovers, but, because JFK had lots of lovers. He had a strange sexual life, but she was his confidant and like his best friend. Okay. And so, to look at JFK's administration, he was elected to the presidency. He was a Cold War guy. He was his father's son. Joseph Kennedy was a fucking Nazi supporter. These were not great guys. Cold War, big military, we're gonna beat them, rah, rah, rah. And JFK gets into the presidency and he starts to wake up. He starts to taste his own power. And so it's in, I think, 1960, early 1963, when Mary went to see Leary and then went back and gave psilocybin to JFK. And my sense of this is that these unitive experiences accelerated his maturation and his leaving his father's worldview.
Yeah.
And inspiring him to really become a world leader.
Yeah.
And I urge, our viewers to go on YouTube and listen to JFK's, it's called the Peace Speech,
Yeah.
June
my favorite.
11th. You heard of it, Gordon?
Yeah, yeah. I love it. It's an amazing speech.
It's considered by a lot of people the most important speech ever given by an American president, in which he says, unlike all the other speeches that are written by speechwriters and vetted by the CIA, Kennedy just wrote this one and delivers it to the graduating class at American University in Washington, D.C. on June 11th, 1963, where he announces this pivot, and that there he is. I feel like crying, and I get
It brought me to tears when I first heard it.
Yeah. So you listen to this speech, and here he is. This is like a guy that hasn't quite come down from his psilocybin yet. He starts off with this great joke, and he basically telling you that we're changing everything here. Again, he's talking to a Cold War induced audience. If we fear the Russians. Kennedy is telling you in this speech that I've been misled by my CIA, and Khrushchev has been misled by his intelligence. We don't hate each other. We're ending the Cold War. Yeah. We are stopping nuclear testing. We are going to do a joint space project. We are going to initiate a whole new humanity. You listen to the language that he uses, and we're going to end the Vietnam War. And this was, I believe, kind of punctuated and kind of inspired by his psychedelic experiences. Now, I ran this theory by Robert Kennedy a few weeks ago. I had dinner with him, and he was, he knows all about this, and he thought, he was already moving in that direction. We didn't really get into it. There were other people around, but so maybe my language is a little strong when I say this punctuated it, but it was certainly contemporary with the time that he's having he had his psychedelic experiences with Mary. And then just a few months after that speech, he's murdered.
Yeah. Are you familiar with David Talbot's book, The Devil's Chessboard?
Yes, of course.
That's another one that I've recently come across, and both these books have completely opened my eyes. This one really dives into especially Alan Dulles and everything he was doing with it. I mean, he's fired and he continues to run the CIA. It's mind-blowing, but you're spot on. I mean, you saw how many enemies he was creating at this point, from deep state officials to Cold War, hardcore types, but it's deeply saddening. I would have loved to see what he could have done if he had had more time with this new paradigm.
Well, yeah. So in putting this material out, I don't want it to be deeply saddening. I want it to be deeply awakening.
Yeah. Right.
Because it can be. I've fallen into depression, for periods of time, realizing what we're up against. And I want to read the book that you're talking about, The Fourth Turning, Ben. But
it's funny. I am on the Fourth Turning Wikipedia. Not that I enjoy Wikipedia all that much, and I was looking up when did the awakening, because it like after a crisis period, there's a high, and they all last 15 to 25 years roughly. When did the high start? Which is right after a crisis. That right after a high, there's an awakening. Right after the awakening, there's an unraveling, which started right around my birthday, in 1982. But as I'm looking on the Wikipedia page, it says, according to the authors, the most recent first turning in the U.S. was the post-World War II American high, beginning in 1946 and ending with the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. So it's just funny, as you're mentioning back to the Fourth Turning, there are these instigating moments that seem to punctuate the leaving of one phase and the entering of another one.
Yeah. Okay. So this is, again, when we talk about, kind of sociology and political history like this, it's a different kind of knowing than with chemistry and biology, because things aren't quite as certain, but this takes research and conversation. So let's also look at right when JFK is murdered in November, I was just 6 or 7 years old. I remember it, but I was a little kid. But it was a heavy time. Like, we loved that president.
Yeah.
I'm from Boston. He was from Boston. We just he was dashing and charismatic and funny and spontaneous and real. And suddenly he's dead. And so then what happens? And there's a whole somber mood, not just me, my family, but the whole culture. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Somber. Then what happens? In January 1964?
Dr. King, his brother.
Oh, coup in Saigon.
No, the Beatles.
Oh,
Interesting.
Lennon.
The 60s start. And the changes, all you need is love. All this stuff starts happening. The drugs start getting pumped in. There's chaos in America, and the drugs are thrown into it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so again, this relationship between crisis and shifting of consciousness, opportunity, this starts to happen again. So there's the Vietnam War is going on, and people are tripping out, and there's a kind of meme that is circulated in this new renaissance that the psychedelic drugs help to catapult the anti-war movement. That's not true at all. What the psychedelic drugs did was undermine the anti-war movement. Anti-war movement was already starting.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
They were put into, you guys have probably seen this. It's a funny video. It's on YouTube where it's called LSD being tested on British troops.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen this?
I have.
These guys are walking in formation, and then they're given LSD, and pretty soon they're all walking all over the place, or they're climbing trees, or they're doing weird shit. And sort of the message of that video is, oh, look, LSD, is part of the anti-war because the soldiers can't fight. But actually what it's showing, that's the anti-war movement.
Yeah.
That's what they did to the anti-war movement. Yeah, this is one of them. Oh yeah, how LSD in the military doesn't work. No, because in order to affect political change, it takes organization and political savvy and getting people to register to vote and do all this kind of stuff. That was starting to happen in America. There was a very sophisticated group of anti-war activists, the Students for a Democratic Society. Smart guys and women at the best schools starting to do this. And they heard Eisenhower say, we got to really change our society. And they were starting to do this kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
And then the LSD comes in. And then you got the Weather Underground. And pretty soon it's free love and sex and tripping out. And let's levitate the Pentagon. Levitating the Pentagon? Come on. And that's what happened.
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.